Like over 1,000 people had to die in order for them to finally be like, okay, like I guess we can teach them how to swim. There are a lot of differences between the two, so there's a lot to get into. It was such a fantastic scene, and I couldn't wait to see it in the movie. And lo and behold, it wasn't even in the movie at all. Instead, they have the dramatic scene. Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about Young Woman and the Sea. The movie is directed by Joachim Ronen and was released in 2024, and I'm comparing it with the nonfiction book Young Woman and the Sea: How Trudy Ederle Conquered the English Channel and Inspired the World, which was released in 2009 and written by Glenn Stout. And so this is the true story of Gertrude Ederle, aka Trudy Ederle, the first woman to swim the English Channel. And no one talks about swimming the English Channel anymore, like it's not the big deal it once was. But yeah, at the time, this was a huge deal. And swimming the channel is extremely difficult because it's 21 miles from France to England. However, the swimmer ends up having to swim more than 21 miles because due to the tide changes, they have to swim in this zigzag fashion. And also the weather is incredibly unpredictable. So it might start out a nice clear day, but then within a few hours, an intense storm can be raging. And the first man who swam the channel, he swam it in 22 hours. And the rules for this are that you cannot be touched by another human. You cannot get out of the water. So he was literally in the water for 22 hours straight to do this swim. They do have like a boat, usually a tugboat, going along beside them to help, give them food. But even when they give food, they do so with this like stick thing so that they don't risk touching fingertips. Because even if you touch fingertips, you are disqualified. So they do have assistance, but yeah, they are in the water for the entire time. And so it is quite the undertaking, regardless of your gender. But yeah, when a woman finally did this swim, and she was also the 6th person overall to do so, it disproved so many beliefs at the time. This is the 1920s, and so many people believed that women were incapable of these intense, difficult endurance feats of strength. They thought they just weren't capable of it. And they were just too delicate and too weak. Trudy Ederle disproved all of that. And she also swam it faster than any of the men before her. And so she really paved the way for women in endurance sports, like swimming, of course, yes, but just all endurance sports, right? Like she showed that the female body is capable of these things. And I'm not a swimmer, but I am a runner, and I have ran several marathons. I have done one ultra marathon. And so I love reading these stories of the women who paved the way before me. It's just so incredible. And so this movie is on Disney Plus, so if you have an account, it is free. And while I have my complaints with the movie, which we will get into, for the most part, it is one that I would recommend. And the book was fascinating because obviously we hear about Trudy Ederle as a person and this achievement of hers, but we also hear the details on the English Channel and why it's so difficult. And we hear the history of that and the history of those who swam the channel before Trudy, as well as some of those who swam after. But then also just the history of swimming is really interesting, as well as the history of the freestyle stroke, which is a very common way to swim these days. But Trudy Ederle was the first person to ever swim the channel using the freestyle stroke. So hearing how that method of swimming came about was also something I had never known about. I had never even thought about. And so that part I really liked as well. And while this book isn't my favorite nonfiction book I've ever read, the story is still incredible, and I highly recommend the book, even though it's not like a 5-star read, I don't think. I think I would give it 4, maybe 4.5. So it's definitely one that I would recommend as well. And from here on out, I will be getting into the details of the book and movie. There are a lot of differences between the two, so there's a lot to get into. And so yeah, we will have spoilers going forward. And so I want to begin with talking about the history of women in swimming. I'm not going to get super in depth into this, but I just did want to touch on it because it's just so wild. Like, women learning how to swim was not only taboo, of course, for so long, but it was also considered evil, right? Like, we all know the stories of how they would throw a woman in water, and if she could float, she was a witch and they would kill her, right? But it was also just considered immoral. And it wasn't super common for men to even know how to swim, but through the centuries, it was definitely the women who were really discouraged and kept from learning. Until 1904, because in 1904 in New York, there was a ship called the Slocum, and it caught fire, and even though it was not even far from shore and the water wasn't even that deep, and yet over 1,000 people died, most of whom were women and children. And not many men were aboard the ship because this was a weekday, and so a lot of the men were at work. And so it was mostly women and children, and the women didn't know how to swim, and so they therefore could not save themselves or their children, and so over 1,000 people died, which was the biggest tragedy New York City had up until September 11th. And the movie has this disaster take place in 1914 when Trudy Ederle was alive because she was born in 1905. But in reality, it took place in 1904. So the year before she was actually even born. But in the book of this disaster, we read, while greed and corruption had certainly played a role in the tragedy, so too did an outdated and oppressive set of social mores that discouraged women from learning how to swim and take control of their destiny. Most of those who had known how to swim, male crew members and young men and boys, had survived. Those who did not know how to swim, mothers and young women and girls, had not. And so it was due to this disaster that it was then considered socially okay to teach females how to swim in order to be able to save their own lives. But it is kind of interesting because it had to be literally a life and death situation in order for it to be deemed okay to teach females how to swim. Like if they just wanted to learn to swim for their own pleasure, like that wasn't good enough. Like over 1,000 people had to die in order for them to finally be like, okay, like I guess we can teach them how to swim for their own safety. Like it's not for pleasure or anything, it's just for their safety. And again, we read in the book, for most young women of the time, there was absolutely no outlet for sports of any kind, not to mention swimming. While there was still staunch resistance to teaching women to swim simply for pleasure, in the wake of the Slocum disaster, instruction in life-saving was another thing entirely. Reluctantly, the United States Volunteer Life-Saving Corps, a group formed after the Civil War that previously had trained male swimmers in life-saving techniques, began to allow women to join the group. And at this time, people who learned how to swim were taught like the breaststroke and the dog paddle. And prior to Trudy Ederle, those who had swam the English Channel did so using the breaststroke and the side stroke. And I'm not going to get into intense detail on the freestyle swim stroke, but basically it came from indigenous people. And so when a white person saw indigenous people swimming like that, they were just like, oh wow, like that's incredible. And so white people started to do it. And when the first white man was seen doing it in public, someone said that it looked like he was crawling on the water. And so for a long time, it was known as the American crawl, which is what I will also be referring to it as throughout the rest of this video. And Lou Handley was a swim coach who was a firm believer in the crawl as the best form of swimming. And he was hired to coach a newly formed swim team for girls called the Women's Swimming Association, also known as the WSA, which was formed by Charlotte Epstein. She was a young adult when the Slocum disaster happened, and so she decided that she wanted to form this swim group, and eventually she got Lou Handley to coach the girls. And Lou Handley was integral in the training of Trudy Ederle. And the movie has Charlotte Epstein be the coach for the girls' swim team, whereas in real life, yeah, it was Handley. And Epstein, she was the founder of this group, so obviously she was a key person. But yeah, in the movie, they just got rid of Lou Handley. They like briefly mention him, but he's not actually the coach, and Epstein is. And on one hand, I get why they did this, right? Because they need to consolidate characters. And in a movie like this, that's about like female empowerment, it kind of makes sense to get rid of the male character and keep the female. However, this did kind of annoy me though, because I liked that we saw Lou Handley was a man who treated his girl swimmers the same way he had treated his previous boy swimmers. And he thought that women should learn how to swim, and he had no prejudice against this, right? And he was a huge advocate for Trudy, and he was her coach. And he was also a huge advocate for the American crawl, which was a big deal too at the time. And so he was such an important part in Trudy Ederle's life that the fact that he's not even in the movie, that kind of bummed me out, right? And the movie, they just like make such a point to show every man as being opposed to women's rights and women's liberation, and women shouldn't know how to swim and they shouldn't do this or that. And so it just got old that literally every male character was like against the female's progression, which it wasn't accurate, right? Like, yeah, like a lot of men were against this, but there were some who were on the side of the women and encouraged them and helped them. And so, yeah, anyway, in real life, Lou Handley was the coach, Charlotte Epstein was the founder, whereas in the movie, it's just Charlotte Epstein. And then to get into Gertrude Ederle, so at a young age, she gets measles, and this is how the film starts out. And in the film, she has the measles, and at the same time is when the Slocum disaster happens. And so while she is sick, the mom goes to the father being like, we need to teach our girls how to swim so that they can save their lives if something like this happens. But at this point, they think Trudy is going to die from the measles, and it's very dramatic in the movie, but ultimately she survives. In real life, she did get the measles, but I don't think she had been on the brink of death, quite like the movie portrays. However, in both, after this, the measles affects her hearing. And in the book in particular, this was a much bigger focus on how she was hard of hearing throughout her life due to having the measles. Whereas in the movie, it's because she has the measles, they're worried about her hearing. And so the dad is like, okay, her sister can learn how to swim. But Trudy, he doesn't want learning how to swim because of her ears. And so in the movie, we see Trudy playing a ukulele and singing a song nonstop until her father gives in, which eventually he does give in and he teaches her how to swim. This was not the case in the book. The father taught all the kids to swim and she didn't have to wear him down the way she does in the movie. And also the movie, it almost, like, they didn't seem poor necessarily, but they didn't seem upper class either. Whereas in real life, her father was very successful. He came to America, opened up a butcher shop, and yeah, they were rich. So the movie kind of downplays their wealth, it seems. But yeah, basically in both, Trudy begins to swim at a young age and she falls in love with it. And she and her sister Meg join the WSA. But Meg is the one who is considered the better swimmer. And it's not until Trudy surprises everybody by winning a race that people suddenly realize what a great swimmer she is. And after this win, Handley spends more time helping Trudy and she ends up breaking one record after another. And in real life, the swim race that she wins happened outdoors in the ocean. Whereas in the movie, it's in a pool and they make it a bit more dramatic because she slips at the start of the swim. So she is behind at the start and yes, she is still able to win. Whereas yeah, in real life, that wasn't the case. But another thing that didn't happen in real life is that in the movie, Trudy is such a poor swimmer that when she first joins the WSA, Charlotte Epstein tells her, like, the only way you can be on the team is if you feed coal to the boiler, because in both book and movie, their indoor pool is in the boiler room. And so she has to feed coal into the boiler in order to maintain her swim team status. She ends up being like bullied by the other girls because she has to do this, and Charlotte feels bad for her. And so at one point she changes the rule and she's like, you know what, we're gonna hold a race and whoever comes in last has to feed the boiler. And for a while, Trudy does come in last, so she has to keep doing this. However, over time, she eventually is not the last one, and she no longer has to feed coal to the boiler. But when she was feeding coal to the boiler, in being bullied by those two girls, I did not like that. It had such a Cinderella vibe to it, for one. And this is Disney, so maybe that was intentional. I don't know. But this aspect of her having to feed coal and being bullied, I didn't like it. And it was just a bit too cheesy for my taste. But to move right along to the 1924 Olympics, America has decided to send a limited number of female swimmers to compete, and Trudy is among those selected. And because she has been shattering records left and right, people assume, and she assumes, that she will go there and win gold in every event she participates in. However, she doesn't end up doing quite as well as she had hoped for a variety of reasons. So for one, on the ship to France, it's a long trip to get over there, and the swimmers, both male and female, had very poor training because all they had was like this 6-foot-long pool, and they fashioned like a treadmill of sorts where they would tie a rope around the swimmer and someone would hold on to it and the swimmer would just swim in place, and that is how they practiced, which again, was not a great way to practice swimming. And the men did have like preferential treatment in the use of this pool, but in the book, in real life, the females did get to use this, but it just wasn't enough. And then also in real life, Trudy also wrestles this other Olympian on board because people like had this competition seeing who could win. And so while wrestling this guy, she also messed up one of her muscles. And then also once they got to Paris, the travel to and from their hotel was this long, bumpy ride. And so again, that is just not ideal for someone who is trying to be in peak physical fitness. And so ultimately in real life, she won 1 gold and 2 bronze, which is decent, but she was just so disappointed in herself because she expected to get all gold. Whereas in the movie, they changed this because first of all, the guy in charge of taking the Olympians to France is this guy named Jabez Wolfe, and his sexism stops the women from even being able to train. So in the movie, they have that treadmill swimming pool. However, in the movie, the women aren't allowed to use it at all. And there's also no commingling from the men to the women. So the women just feel secluded on this ship. And so it's a miserable trip, which again, that's not accurate to real life because in real life, the women did have access to that pool and they also did commingle with the other Olympians. You know, Trudy wrestled this other guy, Olympian, and other people were gathered around watching, having a fun time. So they did have fun to some extent, but in both book and movie, her training definitely took a huge hit. And so when she returns home, she decides, some time passes, and then she decides that she is going to swim the English Channel in hopes of being the first woman to ever do so. And in the movie, the thought of a woman swimming the English Channel just seems like absurd. Like that's not on anyone's mind. They're just all focused on who will be the next man to do so. But Trudy gets this idea along with her sister Meg, who really encourages her swimming. So she gets the idea to do this. And again, this wasn't on anyone's mind, but she talks to Charlotte Epstein and gets Charlotte Epstein on her side. And then they talk to the guy in charge of the swimming association, but he is not convinced and he just thinks it's ridiculous. However, she makes him a bet in the movie because he has to go to Jersey. They're in New York. And so she's like, I will meet you in Jersey and I'll make it in 3 hours. And he's like, okay, if you can make it in 3 hours, we'll pay for you to swim the channel. And of course she succeeds. And so he has to give in and pay for her to go train and swim the channel. In real life, this was not the case. In real life, the whole world was anxious to see who would be the first woman across. Everybody was talking about this. So a lot of women throughout all of these different countries were all training, wanting to be the first. And the WSA, they wanted one of their girls to be the first across. And so they had selected one of their swimmers who was really good, but they were going to bring Trudy along too, just as like a backup basically. But then this other girl gets injured, which leaves only Trudy as their option. And so they fly Trudy out and pay for it and get her trained to swim the channel. And the movie makes it very dramatic with her being the only female there amongst these men who are training to swim. And there's a moment where a guy comes up to her being like, oh, saying how dangerous the channel is. And he's like, who do you think you are to be able to succeed in this? And he's drinking a beer and he puts it down. I had the thought that it would be so cheesy if she grabs the beer to show that she's tough too. But I was like, no, that's like way too cheesy. They won't possibly do that. And what do? They have her grab the beer and take a drink to show how tough she is. And she's just as good as the men. And I was like, oh man, that is so cheesy. But yeah, in real life, there were other women there as well who were training to swim the channel. Like I said, everybody was anxious to see who would be the first female. So Trudy was not the only one there. But yeah, so in real life, she did not have to convince the WSA to let her be one of the ones to swim the channel. And she did not have to make a bet, about swimming and meeting the guy in Jersey. That was all unique to the film. And in the book, though, in real life, she does swim from Battery Park in New York City to Sandy Hook, which is in New Jersey, and that is a 16-mile swim. And so she does do that as a training swim, and in her training swim, she swam it faster than the previous record held by a man. But in both the swimming association, since they are funding her to go, they choose who her coach is, and they choose this guy, Jabez Wolfe. And in the movie, we have met Wolfe before because he was there for the Olympics and he treated the women horribly. And so we already don't like him and we already know this is going to be bad news, right? However, in the book, she had never met him prior to this. And in both book and movie, Wolfe is a man who has attempted to swim the channel many, many times. However, he has never succeeded. However, he is still trusted as a coach because he does have a lot of experience and knowledge about the channel. And yeah, Wolfe and Ederle bump heads right from the start. And long story short, on her attempt to officially swim the channel, he is along with her in the tugboat and he poisons her. She suddenly gets super sleepy and out of it and disoriented. And so they pull her from the water. And remember, if you are touched, you are disqualified. So as soon as someone reached out to touch her, it was over. And so she was brought on board the ship and it was done. And in the movie, they make it seem like Wolfe wants to stop her from achieving this because we see a conversation between him and the guy in charge of the swimming association. And the two of them are talking about how horrible it is that women are making all of these advancements and having access to all of these things that were previously only men. And so they basically say this is one thing that we can prevent women from having and women from achieving. And so that is why he poisons her. And in real life, that might have been part of the reason. I'm sure Wolfe was sexist to some degree. But I think the bigger thing in both book and movie, Wolfe is someone who has tried and failed so many times to swim the channel. And so I feel like he has a chip on his shoulder because of that. And so when some young woman comes around thinking that she can do what he has never even been able to accomplish, I think it takes a hit to his ego and he's annoyed by this and he wants to make sure she isn't able to do it. And then also another added element in the real life is that, again, a lot of women wanted to be the first to swim the channel. And so he, as a trainer, was in high demand. And so he's like, you know what? If Trudy fails, I will continue to be in high demand because women will continue to want to be the first. However, if Trudy succeeds, less women will be interested in swimming the channel, which means I will have fewer clients. And so he also does it for financial reasons. That way he will still be in demand as the seasons go on. But yeah, he ends up poisoning this beef tea he gives her, so she gets super drowsy. And in real life, she had an escort to go with her to swim the channel. And she and the escort are the ones who pieced together like how weird the whole situation was. And they realized that Wolfe had poisoned her. And so they then change coaches and they meet with this guy named Burgess who has swam the channel. He was the second man to do so. And so he and Ederle just hit it off and they really connect. And she wants to try to swim the channel again. However, in real life, the weather just kept getting colder and colder. And they realize that she has missed her window of opportunity and she just has to fly back home and try again next year. Whereas in the movie, she is in the hospital recovering when her father and sister fly out to be with her to support her. And then Burgess walks in, and Burgess in the movie is the one who points out, like, you know, Wolfe poisoned you, basically. And in the movie, there is still time for her to swim the channel again. And so she's supposed to go back home with the swimming association. And so she goes along with that. However, once aboard the ship, she then escapes out of her room window, jumps into the water, and swims to a boat with her father and Burgess and her sister, and then they get her ready to swim the channel again. Yeah, this again was one of those moments that was just a bit too cheesy with her like jumping out the ship window, and then when the guy goes later to get her from her room and he realizes that she's not there anymore. And it was one of those times when they strayed from the true story. And on one hand, I get it. It makes sense, again, to consolidate events and be like, you know what? We'll just have both attempts happen within the same year. Like that change in and of itself, I don't mind. But what I don't like is just how cheesy it was at times, right? Like it was so Hollywood, some of these moments. But yeah, in real life, she went back home and it wasn't until the next year that she was able to return. And yeah, the following year in real life, she needed someone to pay for her to swim over there. Like honestly, her dad was rich enough. She probably could have just done it that way. However, she found a news outlet to pay for her travel and her training because her first attempt to swim the channel, everybody was listening to the radio. Everybody was on the edge of their seats wanting to find out what would happen with her. And so the news realizes like this is one of those serialized stories that gets us a lot of listeners and a lot of readers. And there's a lot of money to be made in these kinds of stories. And so a newspaper pays for her trip, and they also send a journalist who gets one-on-one time with Trudy and gets to witness the whole thing firsthand. And so they are the only news station that will have this firsthand account. And so yeah, that is how she's able to pay for the trip the second time around. And then her father and Meg also join her the second time. And so on that tugboat that assists her, the second time around, it has Burgess, her new coach, who she likes, Meg, her sister, her father, and this journalist, along with, you know, the boat driver and whoever else. But yeah, in the movie, Meg and her father had flown out after she got sick, so they were already there. And then yeah, Burgess meets up with her, tells her that Wolfe poisoned her, and he agrees to help get her ready to make a second attempt. And long story short, in both book and movie, on her second attempt, she succeeds. And the movie makes a big deal of this area called the shallows, and they're like, oh, like avoid the shallows because once you get out there, you're lost and you're done for. And there's this dramatic moment in the film when I don't even remember why anymore, but the tugboat has to leave. So they're like, you're going to be swimming this last stretch on your own. And she ends up in the shallows and she gets kind of lost, but ultimately she makes it out and she makes it onto shore and everything is okay. This was not the case in real life though. I don't remember them saying anything about the shallows in the book. And there is no dramatic moment like that with the boat having to leave her. Instead, the dramatic moment in real life was that during her swim, an intense storm starts to rage. And so people on the boat are arguing, being like, she needs to come back in. Like, this is way too dangerous. We have to call it quits. This weather is insane. However, other people on the boat are like, no, like she wants to stay in. We're keeping her in. We're not taking her out. And so they're having this intense argument on the boat while Trudy, she is just totally aloof. She is swimming just in the zone, enjoying her swim. When someone on the boat is able to get her attention and they yell out to her, like, stop swimming and come back on the boat. But she like doesn't understand what the big deal is. And so she just chuckles and she yells back like, what for? And then she goes back to swimming. And so she swims throughout the duration of the storm. And she and the boat make it onto the shore. And she completes the swim in 14 hours, 31 minutes, which is faster than any of the men before her. And she also did it using the American crawl, which no one had done before her either. And so this is a huge moment, of course, for women in endurance sports, but it's also a huge moment for the American crawl. And a lot of people doubted that method. Like when Wolfe was training her, he hated that she used the crawl, and he was always trying to tell her to do something else. So yeah, so it's a big moment for the American crawl swim stroke as well. And in the movie, after she completes the channel, she then flies back to America, and they have this huge parade for her. And the movie tells us how eventually she did lose her hearing, and that she spent the rest of her life teaching deaf children how to swim. And this is true to the real story. However, in real life, after she completes the swim, she then goes to Germany for 3 weeks because that is where her grandparents live, and her dad wants her to go see her grandparents. And so she's there for 3 whole weeks before then returning to America, where they do hold a huge parade for her, which was like, it's the biggest parade New York has ever had for a person. And so it seems initially that her staying away for 3 weeks didn't hurt because she is still in high demand and people still want to see her, and they're still making financial offers to her, until a couple of days after her return, another woman completes the English Channel swim, and this woman is also an American, and she comes right back to America. And so she is ready to cash in on the fame and fortune that is to be had by swimming the Channel. And so, being the first woman across, Trudy had so many people reaching out, so many sponsorships, so many things that could have helped her be famous and wealthy. However, because she was away for 3 weeks, by the time she returned, someone else had completed it so soon, right? If she had gone straight to America, she would have had like almost a month ahead of this second lady, right? But also another issue is that, remember, in real life, her hearing was a bigger deal on how she couldn't hear very well. And after swimming the Channel, her hearing was even worse. And so because she was going deaf, she was very uncomfortable being in the spotlight and being interviewed because she had a hard time hearing. And so this other woman who swam the Channel, she was also much better in public than Trudy was. And so that also hurt Trudy. And so, yeah, it seems like the poor choices made by her father and her manager, because she was only 20 at the time. And so she just left everything up to them. And so it seems like a combination of their poor choices, as well as the fact that she was hard of hearing, both contributed to her just kind of fading away and being forgotten. And in the book we read, after swimming the English Channel, Trudy Ederle should have taken her place as one of the foremost athletes of the 20th century, on par with such luminaries as Jim Thorpe, Babe Dickerson, the female equivalent of Hillary and Norgay or Jackie Robinson. Yet, through no fault of her own, except perhaps her own innate shyness and reticence, she was forgotten almost immediately. If there is any continuing tragedy to her story, it is that. And so, yeah, she leaves the public eye. However, as the movie says, even though she did go deaf in real life, she does spend a lot of her life teaching deaf kids how to swim. And while she never has a family of her own, she, is very close to her family and her nieces and nephews. And she lived to be 98 years old. But a big change from book to movie is her father, because in the movie, he is not supportive of his daughter's swimming. And when Trudy is breaking all of these records, he is very dismissive of it. And it isn't until her failure to swim the Channel the first time that he suddenly has an awakening, and he's like, what am I doing? Like, this is incredible what my daughter is trying to achieve and what she has achieved. And so that is why he flies out to see her, is because he has had this change of heart. And he now wants to show that he fully supports her. And this was not the case in the book at all. Yes, the mom is the one who really wanted her daughters to swim, and she is the one who signed them up at the WSA. However, in the movie, the father is like, I'm not paying for them to be part of that swim team. And so the mother has to have like this side hustle, making things and selling it in order for her to be able to pay to have her daughters on the swim team. However, in real life, the father was very supportive, and this was not the case. And he was incredibly proud of Trudy and her accomplishments. And that's why he goes with her when she swam the Channel the second time. It's not because he has a dramatic change of heart. It's because he has always supported his daughter. And her second time around, he wanted to be there in person. And in the book, we even read, this is from her early years when she first starts to show her promise as a swimmer. We read, Ederle had the full support of her family. Her father, in particular, burst with pride at his daughter's accomplishments and accompanied her to nearly every meet. And then the movie also has a scene where after the Olympics, she is disappointed in her performance, and clearly her family is too. And so when she comes home, the father has put all of her trophies in a box. And now she is expected to put swimming on the back burner and help around at the butcher shop. But again, The butcher shop was doing great. The girls never had to help out there because they were doing fine as it was. And so yeah, it was just a bit too over dramatic in some ways and just not true at all. Like her father was a huge supporter. But I did like the part though when she is cleaning the shop windows after she has kind of not given up swimming, but she definitely, again, has put it on the back burner. But while she's cleaning these windows, this girl and her friends walk up to her and they say how like Trudy is their hero, right? And how this young girl is a swimmer and how Trudy inspires her essentially. And I did really love this scene because this is what gets Trudy to want to swim the channel with the help of Meg, but it's her realizing that her actions have a greater impact, right? And how she is now someone that young girls can look up to, right? And she herself didn't have any female idols like this, right? Because that just wasn't a thing. And so she wants to be for these girls something that she herself didn't have. And it was just very inspiring and a sweet scene. But also to talk about Meg, her sister. So in real life, Trudy and Meg were very close, and Meg was also a swimmer. And she was there when Trudy swam the channel and she did help her out. But the movie adds this drama where Meg falls in love with this boy, but then the parents force her to marry someone else. And then we just see more drama with her and the parents and the sister like wanting to fight back and be her own person. But because the sexism of the day, she is kind of told what she has to do and that's the path she has to follow, kind of a thing. And none of this was in the book. We don't hear about Meg really, aside from how she impacts Trudy's life, I guess, because this book is focused on Trudy. And so I don't know if any of this is real or not because it wasn't in the book at all. But Meg did influence Trudy a lot. And it is thanks to Meg that Trudy swam the channel to begin with, because when Meg finds out that the WSA is sending someone to swim, she tells Trudy, like, you should be one of the girls. And so that is why Trudy is like the runner-up. And then she becomes the main person once that first girl gets injured. So yeah, Meg was very crucial to Trudy's life and her career as a swimmer. But yeah, all of the added drama with the parents and the marriage and everything, that was unique to the movie. Speaking of drama unique to the movie, in the movie, the father, he also tries to push a marriage onto Trudy. However, Trudy and Meg sabotage it. But again, this was not in the book. And then just to run through some other changes. So in the movie, we have a scene where Trudy's mother tells her that her sister died when they were young. And because of that, the mother finds the ocean and swimming very frightening, which in part, I guess, is why she pushed her daughters to learn how to swim, along with the Solcombe disaster. But this scene in the movie, it wasn't in the book, and it just seemed so random, and I didn't understand why we're suddenly hearing about the mom's sister at this point in the film. Like, I thought it was a pointless scene. And also with the mom, so when Trudy swims the channel the second time, people didn't know that she was swimming, right? They thought she was on her way home. And so when journalists find out and it's reported on the radio, the mom is like, what? Like, she's on her way home. That can't be right. But she finds out it's true. And so then she bursts into the radio office being like, I want to get the updates as soon as you get them. I can't wait for the radio. And so she is there with this radio host and her kids as they get these updates. And again, I just found this cheesy and a bit too Hollywood, and I wasn't a fan of it. And then also with Burgess, the movie makes him out to be like a wild man. And one of the reasons is that he swims in the nude. And this is true. Like, a lot of men would swim the channel in the nude because having clothing, it just caused issues like drag and chafing and stuff. And so it wasn't uncommon to swim naked. But yeah, in the movie, they show him swimming naked, which is one of the reasons why he's like so crazy. But then also we have the scene when Trudy is talking to him being like, promise me that you will not take me out of the water. Like, I will die trying, basically. And he says something about how he's broken every promise he's ever made to a woman. And basically he hasn't had a successful relationship. We see him drinking alcohol. I don't know if it's implying that he's like an alcoholic too or something. I don't know. But they tried to add depth to his character with this scene. But it just seemed so stereotypical and cheap, and it wasn't true to real life. Like, Burgess, he was married. He had a French wife. Even though he was British, he lived in France with his French wife. And yeah, the movie, I just didn't like this scene either, and I didn't like how, again, they tried to give him more depth, but they did so in such a cheesy way, and I just didn't love it. And then also in real life, her father is the one who she says, like, promise me you will not let them take me out of the water. Like, unless I explicitly say, do not take me out of the water. Whereas in the movie, again, they make it more dramatic where she's like, don't take me out of the water no matter what. I would rather die trying than be taken out of the water. And then, in the movie, she says this to Burgess, whereas in the book, in real life, she says this to her father. And when that storm is raging in real life, Burgess is the one who is like, we need to get her out of there. But the father is the one who says like, no, she is staying in that water unless she says otherwise. But to move on to book versus movie, I'm glad this was made into a movie because even though this was written about in a book, having it be a movie will get so many more people's attention. And thanks to this movie, so many more people will know who Gertrude Ederle was, including myself. I am ashamed to say I did not know who she was prior to reading this book. And with the movie, like the performances are fine, but I just really dislike the way they strayed from the true story so much. Like this was already such an amazing accomplishment, and she already did have a number of obstacles in her way, and yet the movie just made it overdramatic and cheesy. And I feel like their overdramatization and Hollywoodization of these scenes, it weakened the story in my mind rather than the book, which just says it like it was. And it's incredible. And the scene in real life when she tells them like, what for? Like when they tell her to get out of the water, I loved that scene so much. Like how on the ship they are freaking out, but then she's just like, what? Like, what for? Like, why would I do that? Like, this is great. So even though the storm is raging, she is just happily swimming and she is just in her element. It was such a fantastic scene and I couldn't wait to see it in the movie. And lo and behold, it wasn't even in the movie at all. Instead, they have the dramatic scene with the shallows where the ship has to abandon her and she has to go forth on her own. And the movie also has a dramatic scene with the jellyfish where she has to swim through a lot of jellyfish. And this was true to real life. Like the channel had jellyfish and every swimmer who swam it, they would be stung by the jellyfish. So that was accurate, but the movie definitely played it up a bit more. And in case you can't tell, when it comes to which one I prefer, the book wins. This was just such an amazing story, and the book is so well researched and it's written in a very engaging way. And the book also, I think, better shows how much swimming meant to Trudy, especially swimming outdoors. And we have a quote that reads, as she herself later said, when swimming, she always felt that she could go on and on. When we're in the water, we're not in this world. In a sense, she had developed a real relationship with the water, once saying about swimming in the open ocean, to me, the sea is like a person, like a child that I've known a long time. It sounds crazy, I know, but when I swim in the sea, I talk to it. I never feel alone when I'm out there. And again, I was expecting to get this quote in the movie, and we never do. I just loved hearing how connected she was to the ocean and just how much swimming meant to her, right? Like she lost her hearing because of swimming, but it just meant so much to her that she swam anyway. And again, it's just so inspiring to read about these pioneers in sports, be it those who broke racial barriers, those who broke gender barriers. And it just makes me realize how I take running for granted. Like I'm not dealing with people telling me that I'm too delicate and a woman shouldn't be running long distance. Like I don't deal with that at all. Whereas the people who came before me, the women who came before me, they had to deal with so much misogyny and so much judgment and so many people telling them that they couldn't and shouldn't do these things that they loved. And Ederle proving how tough females can be is why in the 1928 Olympics, they allowed women to compete in the running sports. Not long distance. Women didn't compete in the marathon distance until the 1980s, so it definitely took a bit of time. But regardless, like Ederle was such a huge figure in getting women in these endurance sports. And as Stout says in the book, like these changes would have happened over time regardless, but Trudy Ederle swimming the channel caused these changes to happen all the sooner because swimming the channel was like the toughest thing there was to do at the time. And so she swam it and she paved the way for so many female endurance athletes. And Ederle also created the two-piece bathing suit because bathing suits at the time were not great. Like they were too baggy, too much fabric. They just weren't good. She was chafing like crazy. And so she and her sister create a brand new bathing suit, which is a two-piece. And this was unheard of at the time. And also she had these custom goggles, but then they do their own, they use candle wax to make the goggles water resistant. And so she could have patented that bathing suit and her goggles and made a fortune, right? But unfortunately, there was no one in her life who suggested she try to market these things. But I guess that wraps it up on my thoughts on Young Women in the Sea, the story of Gertrude Ederle. Again, I highly recommend this book, and the movie is definitely worth watching as well, despite my complaints. I know I've complained about it so much, but I'm still glad I watched it, and I still think it's worth watching, and Trudy Ederle is just an incredible person. And yeah, I'm just so glad I read this book too. And if you read this book and liked it, if you like this story, another book I'd recommend is called Marathon Woman. It is written by the first woman to ever officially run the Boston Marathon. And she is in the infamous photo of her running with a guy trying to like pull her out of the race. And so her story is incredible. And then of course she's a runner, so that makes it extra interesting for me since I am a runner. And then I'm also going to link to my video for Stronger, which is kind of related. It's a memoir by Jeff Bowman, who is a survivor of the Boston Marathon bombing. He wasn't running the Boston Marathon, he was spectating, but then he lost both of his legs from the bomb. And so it's just an incredible book. It's a fantastic movie. And so I feel like this is one not enough people are talking about because they're both just so good. And so I'm going to link to that video if that is something that interests you. You know, it's another story of someone overcoming the odds. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, comment your thoughts down below and let's chat about Young Women in the Sea. And I will see you next time. Bye.